Thank you, Foxhole, thank you, Siege Camp, and you know what? Thank you, Callahan, because I was able to get my hands on Foxhole's newest update early, and I've got to say, it was worth the wait. I flew fighters, was part of a bomber crew, attacked ships in the dive bomber, landed on the water and seaplanes, and I even earned my jump wings. Years ago, I thought this game could never do air combat, but somehow they pulled it off. In this video, I'm going to show you guys everything that I learned during my early access preview, but in true Foxhole fashion, we can't talk about all the cool stuff until we first talk about the logistics of everything. SIVA is going to look a little different. We'll be getting a few new airborne hexes that we weren't able to check out just yet, but here on the overhauled Stema landing, we can see that the spearhead has been reworked to include a runway, an aircraft hangar for building airframes, and an aircraft depot for storage. Although some aircraft, like the smaller scout planes, may just be made from simple armats, the real combat planes come from facilities, and well, it's a process. This is the Colonial Heavy Bomber, the V1 Zikalia, and not only do you have to produce this airframe, but you also have to produce the parts. The bomber needs 9 large Colonial aircraft mechanical parts and 2 large Colonial aircraft engines, and these can only be produced at an aircraft maintenance factory in your facility. When you do finish building these, you can then submit them to the aircraft like you would any other large item, like using rail for small train cars or by simply driving trucks up to them. And once all of the parts are submitted, then the plane will be operational. And because the planes are built out of these multiple parts, they all have separate health pools. Not only do you have this overall airframe, which is very hard to destroy, but each specific part will affect how the plane can fly and maneuver. So, for example, here I'm being chased by a Warden fighter in my Colonial dive bomber, and you can see after a burst of machine gun fire, I lose my tail rudder. Now, I'm still able to fly and go up and down because I still have rudders on my wings, but losing the tail made it far harder to pitch my aircraft up or down, and the destroyed parts make the plane itself less aerodynamic, increasing the drag and reducing my overall speed. A few minutes later, I take more damage to the airframe itself, and you can see that it begins to smoke. The use of parts in these aircraft also means that if you do return to the airstrip, but maybe you lost an engine or another part was destroyed in your trip, you can simply replace whatever was destroyed and get back to flying in the air. With how expensive these parts can be, ditching planes will be extremely costly, so even if you do crash land somewhere, it may be worth it to go scavenge those parts, even if you can't get that airframe operational again. Now, if you were wondering, I did ask the devs how long it would take to build a bomber airframe like this from scratch, and although everything is still work in progress and can change, the current time is estimated at around 36 hours, so yeah, you're going to want to protect those airframes and your facilities. Oh, and for the record, although we had access to both factions' planes, these will be faction locked in the real game, just like the ship, so no alting allowed. If you didn't notice, the parts themselves are faction specific, so even if a Colonial plane does crash land on, let's say, the Great Warden Dam, you can't use any of those parts yourself. Now, larger planes have larger health pools for their airframes, so if you're not actually aiming and hitting critical components, it can be very tough to take things out like bombers. Here, 3 of us in the Colonial fighter planes were trying to shoot down this Warden bomber, but as you can see, we're focusing on the body of the plane. We're hitting the airframe and that giant health pool instead of hitting things like the flaps or the engines. Now, it does eventually go down, but if we had focused on the engines, the flaps, or other parts that would have increased the drag and then reduced the airspeed itself, the bomber would have lost altitude and crashed far sooner. Now in this fight, I'm in the Warden fighter plane and I'm chasing a Warden scout plane, and one of my bursts of gunfire destroys a part that changes the handling of the plane itself. So what was previously a very simple maneuver for the pilot just a minute ago results in him crashing into the ocean. Now I'm sure there's going to be plenty of further testing as these planes do enter dev branch, but from my initial impressions, dogfighting and ambushing planes is relatively straightforward, but actually destroying the enemy planes you're fighting is far harder. You really have to focus on those parts, but let's actually talk flying these planes. At the bottom left of your screen, you have an altimeter, which measures altitude in meters, a speedometer, which measures your speed in knots, and thrust, which is in percentage. At the top right of your screen, you have an indicator for gears, which are either up or down, and under the compass, you have a vertical speed indicator, or VSI, which shows if your plane is pitching up or down. Now, to actually fly this plane, you have to be wearing a new uniform called the pilot's outfit. You then go up and just enter the plane, and then increase your thrust with your mouse scroll wheel, stay on the runway by adjusting left and right rudder with A and D, and then pitch up with S to take off. When you're in the air, press F to raise your landing gear, and then you're good to go. Flight controls are inverted, however, so S is up and W is down, and there is a little line here which indicates your altitude. This line is very helpful for judging altitude of enemy planes, since the top-down view of Foxhole can make things seem really closer or way further than they actually are. If you're not paying attention, what seems like a very straightforward gun run ends up completely missing your target because you're either at different altitudes or your plane's pitch is not actually allowing for your rounds to hit the target. This also means that knowing actual combat maneuvers like oblique and vertical turns or a barrel or displacement roll will be very effective. Understanding how to properly circle fight is very important because it's actually pretty difficult to shake pilots that are doing proper maneuvers. And if you know how to circle fight, you're good, but if you try to improvise, you're gonna be punished. Here at the end of our fight, the enemy pilot tried to pitch up and cut his throttle to try and get behind me, and well, he ultimately can't recover from this loss of airspeed. He stalls out and crashes into the water. Now, I'm not a real pilot, but it does seem like these planes handle pretty realistically, and in order to test this theory that I had of him stalling out, I actually throttled all the way up, nose up into the sky, hit max altitude, and eventually stalled out myself. This stuff is really cool. Oh, and speaking of stalling, planes use heavy oil for fuel, and if you do run out, well, your engine will die and you'll have to try to make an emergency landing, but try to do it a bit softer than I did. Now, aside from dogfighting, there's plenty of other ways to fly in Foxhole Airborne. Planes can obviously strafe ground targets, but bombing is going to be hugely important in the next war. The Colonial Heavy Bomber can perform massive air raids, but you do need an actual bombardier to release these bombs, so don't think you can just do this whole thing solo. Additionally, Wardens have a torpedo bomber and Colonials get a dive bomber. There are also scouts and seaplanes that are cheap and allow for reconnaissance, but the scout planes won't actually allow you to carry anything on your person as a balancing measure. Yes, your inventory has to be completely empty since these things are so cheap and great for recon, and the devs obviously don't want them to be abused. Other planes, however, you can have a sidearm and throw on a parachute, so if you do have to ditch, you can at least eject safely. Now, these parachutes are the same parachutes you can use with the new Paratrooper uniform. In the Paratrooper plane, you can load up in the back, raise the ramp, and then jump out over your target. The Paratroopers actually have a special ability. These uniforms give you 30 minutes of zero intel movement when you land. Yes, Paratroopers do have stealth buffs when you do land, allowing you to cause absolute chaos without the enemy knowing exactly where you are. Oh, and if you were wondering, you cannot land on top of buildings and stay there. For some reason, every time I jumped out of these airplanes, I landed on top of a roof, and you can't just stick there. It kind of just slides you off, pushes you off the building, and you take fall damage, so make sure you got a medic. Now, to wrap up our early access preview, the devs did say that these air bases are going to be predetermined. So you can't like throw up your own runway in the middle of Stickland's Shelf, all right? That doesn't mean you can't kind of jerry-rig your own player-built airstrip. It's just not going to have the same infrastructure and be as effective as the real thing. Runways can be upgraded, and they need to be at a minimum of tier 2 for bombers to gain enough speed. You may be able to get enough speed for smaller planes on dirt and grass, but it's really going to be impractical on anything that isn't an actual runway. There are also new aerial interceptor arrays that players can build, and if you equip a liaison transmitter, you can see planes on the map. And finally, although we don't really know how it's going to work, planes shouldn't just be stuck in queues at the edges of hexes and vulnerable for ambushes, right? There's a no drop zone and exclusion zone around these hex borders, so planes can't camp hex crossings for other planes, infantry, vehicles, ships, whatever. Instead, they need to stay out of this zone for combat operations. So You need to go up to it, try to cross, and fly back in the Hex and wait till you're good to go. Overall, I was absolutely blown away what we got early access to, but in true Foxhole fashion, there are also things like aircraft carriers, which we didn't get to play with yet. Airborne is looking to be a massive update, and the aircraft themselves are so much fun to fly that I'm about ready to go no-life a facility just to make a bomber squadron. It's that cool. Now, if you do want to join the war for Airborne, I'm happy to announce that the Royal Spuds have a brand new Foxhole-specific regimental Discord, and we're already getting prepared. So the link is down below. Come join us, and let's get some flying Spuds in the air. But that's it for me. Until next time, peace.
Let's see how grippy the wing is. Ah! About that grippy. Okay, noted.